Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. My name's Stephen Galpin. This is the programme where you can have all your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. With me today are Tom Balashev. Welcome Tom, you're founder of Montague Property International. Welcome back. Ranjan Bhattacharya, founder of succeedinproperty.com. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
And not least, Ayesha Ofori, Director of Axiom Property Partners and founder of PropElle.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome to you all. Tom, we're going to start with your question, and your first question of this programme is this. Whenever I Google luxury property overseas, I end up with loads of apartments being marketed in Dubai. This is an area I don't really like. Other than that, it seems to be Florida. What other areas nearer home are likely to have a good choice of high quality new build properties?
Okay, it's a good question. I assume home is the UK. First of all, to explain why they're only seeing Dubai and Florida, that's just based on Google pay-per-click advertising. Whoever pays the most, they're going to rank the top part of this of the page. So they're just going to have to grin and bear it. But I would say that they need to think about what they want from an area. So do they want sun? Do they want the sort of winter tourism environment? What's their first requirement? And then just simply jump on Google. I think a lot of people these days are looking in interesting places around the Med, so places like Montenegro, Croatia, who have got fantastic tourism spots, the exact same climate as Italy, really, really economical and great places to live and stay.
Okay. And, well, as Dubai was mentioned, how is the market there? It's been very up and down over the last 10 years,
it's difficult. When you have an area like Dubai that has such a huge peak and then you reference anything to that peak, then it's always going to be in a slightly worse off situation. But that part of the Middle East is a really, really strong economical area. It will always have big businesses there. They will always pour tens and trillions of dollars into growing that area, so it's always going to be a safe bet for the long term.
And am I right in thinking that residency there's a little bit easier these days?
Yeah, there's a lot of initiatives there to secure residency. Tax residency plays a big part if you're a sea level executive. There's a lot of great schemes there that you can take advantage of.
Aisha, anything to add to that?
I would just say that if you are considering buying property abroad, to make sure that you also speak to local experts who know the little things that you may not know if you don't live there. I think it's always a good idea to do your homework, but in this case, do some homework at home, but then also find somebody in the region as well.
And perhaps find somebody who's bought there too.
Exactly, and that can just give you an idea of sort of what it's like, and if it's somewhere where you haven't been, potentially visit first.
Okay.
It's one thing to sort of look online, it's another thing when you get there and to see what it feels like. Can you imagine yourself being there?
Just to jump in on that, I actually think that's a really good point, because what a lot of people underestimate is how easy it is to access Europe. The cost of a flight now can be under £100. The cost of a train from London to Manchester can be over £100. So you can in many cases access lots of good places in Europe for less than it would cost you to jump on the train. So people should definitely take a trip out there, 100%.
Okay, Ranjan, anything to add?
Well, I think the Brexit uncertainty is a bit of a spanner in the works with Europe.
Now, we usually make everybody promise that they're never going to
I know. I think, let me just clarify what I mean. I think if you were buying in Europe, you knew where the ground laid because the rules were the same.
Yes.
With Brexit, we don't know what the rules will be, whether it will be with individual countries, but generally when you're buying abroad, you've always got to remember that you are not a voter in that country. So you will always find the tax rules will apply differently to foreign investors as they will do for domestic investors. So always find out how you're treated from a tax position, being a UK investor, not being a voter in that country, and investing in a foreign property. And with Europe, it's just all up for grabs because we just don't know the position that it will be. As Brexit unfolds.
But I think, as with most property matters, best consult an expert.
Absolutely.
I think so. Okay, Ranjan, we'll move on to your question. My local town has the building used by a large vets practice for rent. It's in a busy location, got a lot of ground space, and has been empty for about a year. As a form of vets, it has a few unwholesome features which need removing, and some odours too. I was thinking about approaching the owner with an offer to buy it, So I could literally gut it and turn it into a set of 5 boutique shops with a common entrance. I've not seen anything quite like this before. Are there any drawbacks or hurdles I should consider if he agrees to the sale?
That's a very good question, and whoever's asked it is obviously being creative and imaginative, because there are plenty of buildings, commercial buildings around, which are no longer fit for their original purpose, and it's creative people like the person who answered that question who can think about repurposing them who will win. Unfortunately, there are no permitted development rights which will allow the transition from a vet practice to 5 shops. That would be under planning. And generally, what I advise people to do when they're taking a significant planning risk is to involve the vendor in the deal. So let's say the vendor is asking, £500,000 for the site, and it's been on the market for a year, hasn't had any offers. You don't go in there saying you're going to offer, £300,000 and try to get it cheap. Maybe offer him slightly more, but make the deal conditional on getting the planning permission for the scheme that he wants to do. So the vendor wins. The purchaser is de-risked because they're not having to shoulder the planning risk. All they'll have to shoulder is the cost of putting in the planning application usually. And then it would be a good punt.
Would he have some advantage now? We're hearing all this business of the high street dying, so anybody wanting to add 5 shops to a shopping area would be encouraged, would they, or not?
I don't think the planners will care, but from the investor's perspective, you've got to make absolutely sure that there's a demand for retail in that particular area. And this is a great opportunity for investors because the headlines are doom and gloom about the high street, but it's really on a high street by high street basis. We do shops. Our experiences with shops in affluent areas is that there's still plenty of demand from retailers wanting to open up in those areas. And there are areas which are completely desolate, but the desolate areas are leading the headlines. So you would have to do some research to find out whether there was occupier demand for 5 retail units in that.
It's quite interesting, the argument about high streets. We've done a number of programmes on Property TV about the death of the high street as such. I'm not sure it has died, but I do think it's changed.
It's transitioning.
We've got shops here in Canary Wharf in the Mells here that are absolutely buzzing. You can't get in there at lunchtime. So that's the new high street. You can take your partner in, you can shop, you can eat, you can drink, you can do whatever you like without taking a car, without moving more than 50 yards, and that's perhaps the way we're going. But anyway, anything to add, Tom?
I think that's out of my remit, if I'm honest. Okay. But what I would say to them is, which I think is a really good ploy, which more people should use, is to bring exactly what you're saying, to bring someone in. Don't always try and do that and try and keep as much of the deal as possible. Sometimes to give a little bit away actually gets you a little bit more flexibility, and you can do more if you do that.
Well, it's like any investment, you need to invest.
And the vendor might even be interested in partnering, so that's one option to consider as well.
Okay, good, great stuff. Thank you very much. Ayesha, your turn. How much money would I need to start a small buy-to-let business? Well, we've had this one so twice before. Are there any guidelines that could be given, or perhaps some general advice to steer me in the right direction? I was hoping to do this on very little money, but the investment of my time.
So this question, yes, it has come up before. It really comes down to several things. A, how much capital you have. B, how much time you have. And I'd say C, how far you're prepared to travel. The further north you go, typically you find that property prices are much cheaper. So people who have limited capital can afford to potentially start a portfolio that they may not be able to do in London or closer to London. But at the same time, whilst you may be able to afford something, that's a 3-4 hour train ride away, how are you going to manage it? Are you going to pay for somebody else to do it, in which case it's going to cost more? Do you want to do it yourself, or how physically are you going to get there if things go wrong? So I'd say if you have limited resources and you can find an area that is within what I call commutable distance, then I'd say absolutely consider going down that route. But something else that could work would be partnering with somebody. If you're sort of time rich but cash poor, maybe you could partner with somebody who's, you know, cash rich but doesn't have a lot of time. And if you have a partnership like that, you know, it could work very well. Somebody's going out there looking for the properties and somebody else is funding it.
Okay, I think I'm very much with you on the geographical aspect of this. It becomes very hard to manage properties that you can't see,
Absolutely.
and especially if you're not experienced and you don't have a sort of set team around you, I think. What do you think, Tom?
I wouldn't advise starting any business on a shoestring. So the first thing I'd say to them is, if they are a little bit low on cash reserves, to either considering starting a business when they have more cash, or doing, as Ayesha was saying, is partnering with someone that is going to be able to help navigate that business a little bit better, because I think the stats are like 90% of first-time businesses fail or something like that, and the thing that keeps businesses going the longest, as anyone will know, is having good cash flow. So if they're limited, I'd make them think long and hard about it.
Well, again, it's one of these things, isn't it? You know, there's no such thing as a free lunch. You can't have an investment in property really without any money. And if you do, you're treating it really as a 5-minute business, and I think we all know property is not a 5-minute business. Okay, just anything quick on that, Ranjan, to add?
I think a lot of people with limited funds do chase properties up north, and people have got to understand, like, I think the national average house price is about £200,000. If you're going to buy a property which is £80,000 or £60,000, it's less than half the national average. And there's a reason why those houses are so cheap. And the key bit of research that people don't do, they get caught up with the fact is, I can buy a house for £60,000, I can rent it out for 4 rooms and all of this, but they haven't actually checked whether there's sufficient occupancy demand to actually generate the cash flows that they did their nice little spreadsheets on.
And I can't tell you how many developers I've talked to that say, right, if you go down there or right up there, the property's only this much. And they forget all about sales rates and everything else. Right, Tom, we're going to go to you for your final question of the day. I have friends in Sweden. It seems that the quality of housing there is generally quite high and the build costs are very low. If you can get hold of the land, that is. How does the property market work there? Would I need to register with agents and inform them that I'm interested in any land that comes available, or how would I approach this?
Oh, that's a great question. Difficult thing is that Swedish property prices are in decline, and it's not really a hotspot to invest into right now.
What's causing the decline?
There's really supply and demand issues. There's not much demand and there's not much supply either. So on average, property prices are going down about 0.6% per month. So when you're talking about a development scheme, there's always that scope to make money. So it can make sense in anywhere in the world, but in that particular area, it might make sense to sort of avoid that. But if they like the idea of Sweden because of the high quality build, I could suggest other areas that they could look at. Somewhere like Germany has the same level of build, fantastic track record with high quality buildings. It's got a similar culture in many cities to somewhere like Stockholm, Berlin, for example. Very, very close to what they would expect in Stockholm. And it's got a much more buoyant property market. They could do a scheme like that in Germany. It's a little bit more flexible to invest into, and they probably ultimately, it'd be difficult to say, but should make a little bit more meat on the bone.
I don't know whether this isn't a little bit like normal property logic. You know, there's an awful lot of property for sale, isn't there? And there's an awful lot of countries in Europe. I don't know why you'd have to pick one that's difficult. It's
Scandinavia as a whole. People are so attracted to that culture, that environment, and when people go into their local IKEA and they see like how these houses are set up, it's natural to aspire to want to have something like that. But
Ranjan, anything to add to that?
I think, I know one thing I know about Sweden is they have negative interest rates, and I can't get my head around the effect of negative interest rates has on the economy. But that is one of the factors behind the things that you're talking about.
Very difficult for financing there as well.
Yeah.
Ayesha?
I think I would just, second what's been said already. If you had a particular region in mind, why not consider others that are similar? Do your homework on all of them, look at the numbers, think it out, and then make a decision across all of them.
Yes. Once again, I just get very nervous when I see this sort of question. I just wonder where they're going to get the professional advice from and the day-to-day advice that they need. I mean, it'd be relatively easy to get sort of all-encompassing sort of accountancy advice, but whether you can get and access good market advice.
They talked a lot about like that it's nice quality homes, and that's down to the person that's building something. Like you dictate the quality of a build, so you can achieve that Scandinavian finish in the UK.
Wherever, yes.
But as you said, I mean, you can achieve that in Germany because a lot of the Swedish homes are prefabricated.
Yeah.
And the reason they're built well is they're built well by machines and factories, and often they're from German factories, aren't they?
Yeah, the German markets, if they like that type of property, that type of environment, Germany's a really, really good alternative.
Okay, good ideas. Thank you very much indeed. Ranjan, let's move on to your second question. The top floor of a large 25-year-old office block in my town is now available with a new lease of up to 25 years. I think it would make an ideal location for penthouse apartments. Other than the landlord's permission and planning consents for a change of use, are there any other issues I might be missing? Any comments would be appreciated.
I think the big thing is never in a month of Sundays is he going to get permission from the freeholder or landlord, consent to split just one floor in an office building into multiple apartments. If someone came to us with that sort of proposal, we'd just reject it outright. Because it upsets the whole balance of the whole building if you've got just one floor residential and the rest are office tenants. The other issue with this is the lease. It's not as though, so if it was a 999-year lease, there may be some grounds for that, but once you've actually split it up into apartments, what do you do with them? You can't exactly sell them because you can only offer 25 years remaining term at the lease, so they're unmortgageable. So you have to question, well, first of all, I think it's a non-starter because I can't see any freeholder agreeing. There's just no business case for doing so. And secondly, even if you did convert them into apartments, what's the exit route after that? You can't sell them on because 25-year lease, they're unsaleable. So are you just keeping them on for, it seems an awful lot of work to do just for a 25-year payback? Why bother doing all that work when you can do a project where you've got the freehold and you make a space into a bunch of apartments and keep the lot?
I'm just almost getting a headache.
I just got a headache.
thinking about the problems. You've got sort of the cross between residential access and exit, versus commercial requirements.
Yes.
You've got various wiring in the building for commercial, not for residential. You've then got the sort of general business of quiet enjoyment. I don't know how that's going to work. I mean, it's just, I think I'd run away.
No landlord would agree.
Ayesha?
Sometimes it is the sort of more challenging, difficult opportunities that can reap the best rewards. However, there needs to be some sort of play. There needs to be something that you can see in it where you can add value with, amounts of risks that are workable, and I just don't see it here. I just don't see anything in here.
I mean, that's a very different proposition from the idea of finding an existing residential block and saying to the freeholders, look, we can put another floor on this. It'll look attractive. It'll stack up financially, and that can be slotted in with the current leases that are already given.
One thing they didn't mention, I mean, I assume this is not in Chelsea or somewhere like that. I mean, the only place where it would possibly work on such a low lease is a very high value area, but that's provided the landlord would give permission, which I don't think would happen.
But I presume you're saying that because of sort of cash buyers.
Yes.
And then is a cash buyer actually going to want a flat on top of a...
That's true as well. I mean,
office block. It just doesn't work.
I'm going to give these people some hope. I'm going to give them some hope. So I visited them, might have to tweak their vision slightly. I visited an office this morning before I came to shoot here today that is 5 stories. The third story is co-living space, and the top 3 stories are offices, and then the bottom 2 are co-working spaces. So that's a scheme that's gone up in London, and I think if you're in the right area, to pick up on what you said, I think if the right area, perhaps London, Manchester, big towns with big business presence, you might, this is very adventurous, but you might be able to get a scheme put together where you could have professionals working and living in the same environment.
I think that's a good idea. I have to say here, we mentioned several times in this programme, there's in the next 2 to 3 years 24,000 apartments coming on stream in this Canary Wharf area. It's going to create a huge oversupply for a year or two at the point. And I just wonder whether you'll have people moving in, taking whole floors to be a co-living area, really upmarket facilities. I don't know.
I think what will happen, and this is already happening, the kind of development that you're talking about is happening, but that tends to be one developer and one owner who's doing the whole building as a sort of blended environment, as opposed to someone just taking a unilateral floor, which will obviously have an impact on the other occupiers.
Sure.
It needs to be done in a holistic way altogether, and it's usually done by one developer who's doing a combined live-work type of mix setup.
Okay, great. Well, not a lot of hope there, but a little bit of light from Tom, so that's good. Ayesha, your last question. My daughter has recently moved into a larger house, and instead of just getting a new mortgage, has used a lot of the equity from the sale of her old house as the deposit to also buy a smaller house to rent out. I'm concerned that she's starting a property business and might have to pay tax on the rent the house generates. Probably fair point. She hasn't accounted for this. Am I right to advise her?
So the first thing that I would say is whenever it comes to discussions around tax advice, you must speak to a qualified tax advisor. But typically when you generate extra income, it does depend on sort of what tax band you're at, but you do need to consider whether or not you have to pay tax on it. So whether or not she feels she's starting a property business, the fact that she has an additional property that she's not living in that is being rented, that income likely will need to be taxed in some way, and it is something that she's going to have to consider. So just because you don't necessarily feel you're running a property business because you don't have staff and multiple properties, it is something that she will need to look at. Yes.
Yes.
So the question is.
Once again, good advice before you're getting in a mess. Really.
Basically, yes. And it's always prudent to check and to ask. It's better to ask and have an expert say, no, you don't have to do something, versus to find out later and get...
Well, it's the same with calculating rental income, isn't it? So often we get people writing and say, well, to calculate the rental income, I times 52 by the amount of rent I'm going to receive. And of course they forget to think about the months that they don't rent it, or that their tenant's cleared off, or they've fallen out with the agent.
It's also got a lot more complicated now, because it's not just the tax on the rental income that you have to pay. If you buy it in your own name and you've got a mortgage on it, then you've got to consider that you're not offsetting all your mortgage interest against your taxable income. So there's another hit there that
and how, of course, your rental status is appreciated, whether you're considered a portfolio owner or not. Anyway, look, that's all we've got time for. So great big thank you to Tom Balashev. Thank you
very much.
Ranjan Bhattacharya, thank you for joining us today, and again Ayesha Ofori, thank you for coming in. My name's Stephen Galpin. That's all we have time for today, so do join us next time on Property Question Time.